let's review how to make a histogram, and then we'll actually build one together. We'll pick a data set. So histogram is just a bar chart of a frequency table. So for example, we made a frequency table for eye color. Usually with a histogram, it's instead of categorical data, it's on quantitative data. So frequency table for quantitative data is a little different than categorical, but similar. The first step is to make groups for your data. And those groups have to have the same width. So a common thing right here, for example, would be ages of people. The groups might be something like 1 to 9, and then 10 to 19, 20 to 29, right? We count people in the single digits, people in the teens, people in their 20s, people in their 30s, and so on. So here, all my groups are, now I'm not starting at 0, but all my groups are about 10 in width. So my common width there is 10. When we make a frequency table, we either decide on what the width is going to be, or we decide on how many groups we want. So you have to make that decision. Decide on the common width of the groups, or the number of groups. As far as the number of groups go, you want somewhere between 5 and 20. Usually fewer than 5 is too broad, and more than 20 is too many columns and it gets too messy. So generally when I make one of these, I have 6 to 10 is what I usually go for. I don't like more than 10, and 5 or 6 is okay. Usually I settle around 6. So let's take a data set and do this. So we're going to go back to, let's see, I might as well point out Statkey here. It's kind of a cool tool we're going to use for a couple of things. So I linked to a place on Statkey where they have data sets of one quantitative variable. So the one I'm looking at here is mammal longevity. If I wanted to see the data, what it is the average lifespan of a baboon, the average lifespan of a black bear, of a grizzly bear, of a polar bear, of a beaver, and so on. Buffalo, camel, and there's a whole bunch. I think there's 40, how many animals? Yeah, 40 different animals here that they have their longevity, which is their average lifespan. Here they have a dot plot, is what I call it, most places call it. Our book called it a line plot. I could also use Statkey to make a histogram. Notice the histogram tab here. And again, Statkey is linked in activity 7.1b about histograms. And I linked it there just because given a data set, it makes good, quick histograms. Now there's some pros and cons to it. For example, at the bottom here, it says 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, but clearly those numbers are not the borders between each of these columns. When I point to a column, you'll notice in the bottom right here, it shows what the actual boundaries for those columns are. So here it's going from 1 to 4.9, and then from 4.9 to 8.8, 8.8 to 12.7, 12.7 to 16.6, and so on. So these are all supposed to be the same width here, but it's got some weird numbers. Now what it's doing is it's calculating those widths by saying the smallest number it sees is 1, the biggest number is 40. It's finding the distance between them, and it wants 10 groups. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so then it's splitting that distance up from 1 to 40 into those 10 groups there. Right. And so that's where these are coming from. And so I gave an example last time about how to do that by hand. So I'm going to show how to do a quick histogram and then how to set up the groups by yourself. One nice thing in Statkey is I can just grab this little slider and pick a different number of buckets to do this. And I can decide which histogram I like better. So notice when we change the bucket size, the histogram looks pretty different. That one looks like it's giving me the finger. That one too. Okay. How do you pick the best histogram? Well, it turns out there's not necessarily a set way to do that. You just have to decide which one you like. So maybe I'd say, I like this one right here with 9 buckets. The groups are called buckets or bins or classes, lots of different names for them. I can also go to set limits here, and then I can say, hey, let's start at 0 instead. Let's say the max is 40, and let's go with 10 groups. And so then hopefully I will get slightly nicer numbers, 0 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 to 16. So you can try to force it to make nicer numbers, but again, the downside of Statkey is that the numbers at the bottom here don't match the breakpoints of the columns. So let's see, 40, I would have to divide by 8 to make that happen. So if I wanted it to match their scale, I would have to use 8 groups. And then they line up at 5, 10, 15. Ooh, not quite. What did I do wrong? 5 times 8 is 40. Oh, it started at 1 instead of 0. Now that should be nicer. 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and so on. Okay. So you can force it to do things you want. So it's not as configurable, but it's super fast. You could take your own data and plug it in here. So if we go back to the average person chart and we go to the copy of form responses, we could grab all of the heights. So we just do that by clicking here, and then to get all of them, Control-Shift down arrow should look for the bottom of the list. And you might have to click it a couple of times if people left blanks. So I had to do Control-Shift down arrow a few times there. If I copy that, I can then go back to Statkey and give it my data. So then to do that, I would edit, delete all of their stuff, and paste my data in. Now I did copy that header height in inches, but I don't have a first column that says this is Gary's height and that's Lauren's height and that's Ruby's height and so on. So I do have a header, so that should be checked, but I don't have an identifier for each number. I don't have an extra column for that. So double check you have these set right and then hit OK, and then it throws your data in there. Just switch to histogram. Somebody must have given us a strange number, because we have somebody down here in the 10-inch category, and it automatically picked 10 buckets for me. And so I could play around with those limits. I'm going to take a look at that data. So somebody entered a 5, so I'm just going to delete that 5 because it's messing up my data. Okay. And oh, it looks like I have some other weird numbers. There was another 5 and a 5.8. So again, sometimes we have to scrub, our data. So if you did grab this data set with me, then find the offending numbers and remove them. 5.8's got to go, and 5's got to go. All right, so like I mentioned, sometimes we got to scrub our data. So we have 52 on up. Okay, that looks better. Histogram, and then if we want nicer numbers down here, we can go to set limits to control that. So maybe I'll go from 50 to 80 and have 10 groups. So if I have, let's see, 50, 80 is what, third, so that should be 3 wide. Maybe I want it to be like 5 wide. So that would be what, 6 groups. So 80 minus 50 is 30. 30 divided by 6 is 5. So each of the groups should be 5 wide. So you can force it to have nicer numbers. Oh, that's beautiful. Look at that. Nice. Now, again, downsides of Statkey, you don't have control over the numbers at the bottom. We do in a spreadsheet. I'll show that in a second. And the other thing is, to get a picture of this, you have to do a screenshot. You can't try to copy the image. The browser thinks it works, but it doesn't. So the only way for me to use this image to submit to somebody is on Windows, I would have to use the snipping tool. New snip. And then I would have to highlight just what I want. In Google, you can do a copy. So if I was going to put this in my Google Doc, copy and paste it in there. Now it's missing titles, so I would have to add some title on the side, on the bottom, and on the top for what this data means. So anytime we have a graph, especially it's a graph that has a vertical and horizontal axis, there should be a chart title at the top. There should be a label for what the vertical axis means and another label for the horizontal. So I have to squeeze that in here. So for this one here, oops, come here. Driving me nuts here. Just want to get on top. Oh, I know what I got to do. I have to put in a
Gary, when I went to do my histogram, for some reason it wasn't working.
in Statkey or in
Statkey.
Statkey. Okay. So again, the procedure for Statkey, we're using the same data or a different one?
I was using the height in inches.
The height data. Okay. So just review what I did there.
It says improper format.
Okay. So something about what you highlighted, it didn't like. So we have to figure out what. So when I highlighted this, you can't do the whole column. You have to only go from the top and then shift and highlight or use your mouse to get down to the bottom of the list.
Okay, yeah, that's what I did.
Okay, so once I get down to the bottom, I copy, Control C, and then you should be able to go in here, edit data. First, delete whatever's there so that it's blank. So I have nothing there, and then I can paste it in, right-click, paste, and then you want to make sure it's just the list of numbers. And you don't have to have the title at the top, that's optional, so I could easily get rid of that because Statkey's not going to use it anyway. And then you have to make sure you have the right button selected here. Now I don't have 2 columns, so I have to uncheck first column as identifier. I just deleted my header, so I'm going to uncheck that too. So if those boxes aren't checked right, that could go wrong too. And then you should be able to go OK, and it should take it. Any luck?
Yeah, I think it just figured itself out. Thank you.
Okay. The problem with me repasting that is I have this 5.8 and the 2 5s. Those are definitely mistakes, so I got to pull those out to get a decent histogram. So then I have to go back to edit and find those offending numbers and get rid of them. Added a header row called custom. I could try to put heights in there, see if it'll take it. I think it usually ignores that. It still says custom over here. But now I have a more reasonable range of numbers, and then I can play with the limits and pick nicer numbers so that the divisions between columns are just cleaner. So this is what I would do here. And again, the reason I decided to do 6 buckets is the range between my max and my min is 30. 6 goes into 35 times, so each of the columns should be 5 wide, which makes nice numbers. And so often we decide on the histogram by not necessarily how it looks, but the numbers that we want to make the divisions for. All right. And again, the way we paste from one program into another matters. Sometimes weird shit happens. And then I was pointing out over here, if you do a copy and paste from Statkey, then you would have to go in and type some nice numbers. If I can get this to behave. Goodness, there we go. I want to be right on top. And so then you just want to type a descriptive title. So let's see, this would be it's the college students. So you want to have a title for the whole chart, and then you have to come up with a title for the side and the bottom axis. So underneath here, this would just be something like height in inches.
And then how do I copy and paste it from Statkey again?
Yeah, so the only way to, what kind of computer do you have?
I have a Chromebook.
A Chromebook, okay. I forgot how to do it on a Chromebook. Let's look it up. So Chromebook, we want to do a screenshot. Okay, so on a Chromebook, Control Show Windows button, and it will save in the Downloads folder. So let's double check this here. That's weird. Control, so there's a Show Windows button on your keyboard. And that should probably take a picture of the whole screen, and then you would have to crop it in Google Drive. So give that a shot.
I don't really see a Windows key, but I'm sure I'll figure it out.
You don't see a Windows key on your keyboard. The Show Windows, it's trying to show it to me here on the screen. Do you have a button that looks like that?
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah, so it'd be Control and then push that button right there. And that should take a picture of the whole screen and put it in your Downloads folder. So in that case, you would get everything on the screen. So that would be like me using the Snip Tool. Let's do a where it takes a picture of the whole screen. Now it's going to save it in your downloads, so I'll put it in my downloads too. Just leave it called capture. And then when I stick that in Google, I'm going to have to crop it. So if I go to then insert image from my computer, it's way more than I want. So that's when we click on it, we choose the crop option, and we narrow it down to just what we want to see. And then add your labels. And then hit enter once you have it cropped. For that side here, this is a count on the side or a frequency. So I have to sneak over to this side here and type something like number students. And then there's a way to get that to appear more in the middle. So let's see. Image options, I believe. Text wrapping. Text wrap. So then you just have to be a little clever about that. To try to get that label to look like it's attached to the side there. So that's kind of a pain to do, but you can do it. Other way to do it is to do an insert in a drawing, and then you put the file in a drawing, and then you can add text to the picture in the drawing. And that gives you a little more control over where text gets. But unfortunately, you know, there's no great way to do it. best way to do this is in a spreadsheet. So I'm going to show a spreadsheet next. Actually, I have a spreadsheet already in 2 other recordings, so I'm going to call this one good. I don't think I need a new recording on that. But again, histogram is all about deciding on how to group your data and then counting how many things are in each group.